So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about myself and what my experience is, and there may be parts where I end up sharing my testimony as we kind of make this game. There were lots of things I felt inspired by today when I was making it. I wanted to add more to the game. I wanted to make sure I had more to teach you, more to give you about Unity, and I just kept getting inspiration about, I need to use this scripture. All right, well, I'll use this scripture in the memory verse, and it kind of went more that way. So hopefully it's beneficial to someone either here or maybe somebody watching the video at home. But we'll definitely get into making this game. I started making games about five or 6 years ago. I don't know the exact time, but I started out actually designing and using PowerPoint just to throw together a good design for here's a game, and it was kind of playable. And ironically, the first game I started making like that was a scripture memory game where you're unscrambling verses and trying to figure out what order does it go in, and people found it surprisingly difficult. The first one I did, a playtest one, was just Romans 8:28, and I knew the people I was playtesting with weren't necessarily Christians, they were just students, and they found some really funny scramblings, but had no idea how to get even close. So I was like, well, that's interesting, but it made the game very difficult to make, because what audience do you target? How many words do you put together to make, versus how many pieces do you have? If it was one word per puzzle piece, it was difficult even for me to unscramble it, and I had just written it. So it was interesting to get into that kind of design aspect and how, and this is a very straightforward one. You'll find verse memorization apps on the iOS store, on the Google store. But why do we get kind of stuck there, and what makes them fun? And it can be very difficult to get into that design. But I started going to school at University of Advancing Technology to get a programming degree, because I wanted to be able to make it myself, not just have this cool idea that I can't prove to people, but be able to actually make it a fully playable with a score and everything. So I got a bachelor's degree in game programming. And since then, I got hired by EA and was able to get a job that actually supported my family. And it was really amazing to be led in the direction that I was, because I never knew in advance, is this just a waste of money going into this? Is this actually something I can do to support my family? And of course, in the indie world, I saw how supporting your family should not be a goal because it's not a very high income. But I was able to get a job that allowed me to learn a lot more, and even though I might not have been making, Christian games or games that I believed in the theology behind, I was able to learn a lot more about how to be a good programmer and how to use a game engine and how to really put things together quickly. So all through school and even at my current job, we've been using the Unity game engine. And I use C# more than any other language, although I use Python and some other things as well. And I do encourage people, if you really want to go into that, make a living out of it, that you're going to have to learn more than just one game engine. You're going to have to learn more than just one programming language, because that can really limit you. But it is a good place to start. So I figure we'll go ahead and take a look at Unity 5. That's the current version of Unity, and they've added a lot to it over the previous versions that make it actually a very good tool. And I have a paid version on here, but you definitely don't need a paid version when you're learning or when you're making games. You can even publish games without ever actually needing to pay for it. But if you get, where you're actually making some money, it's best to pay for it so that way you don't have to pay any royalties. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up Unity. And what you can do when you see this screen, this is what you'll get for Unity 5, which is a little different than Unity 4 was. You can just then select if you have a project, or you go ahead and click New if you're making a new one. I went ahead and started a brand new one right here. And I have another one that's a little farther along in case I get lost myself. But so I open up, mine's got a nice black background because it's the paid for version. That's one of the biggest differences. It changes the color. I know, useful. All right, so when you're looking at the Unity game engine, it actually looks a lot like many other engines like Unreal, and even the one that was shared earlier as an open source engine looks very similar. You can change the format by coming over here to layout in the top right, and you can pick whatever one looks a little bit nicer to you. You can change it. That would not be the one I would pick. I actually like wide. So I like having a nice wide screen. And then we'll cover what some of these different menus end up having. One of the ones I never use actually that favorites right there. I don't really like having that there, but this assets folder is going to become very important because you're going to have a lot of things in there, from your scripts to your images to everything else is going to end up in folders like this. If not the assets folder, then one of the other ones like it. So let's see. One of the things we're going to want to do is the scenes in Unity are actually a little different than maybe some other engines. But I'm going to go ahead, even though we haven't done anything, and come up here to save scene. Because I want to give this scene a name. I want to know what this scene is. And if I was doing a game that had maybe a side scroller with many levels, I might just call it level 1 and then have the next one be level 2. In this case, I'm just going to call it game scene, because I don't plan on having many other scenes. I don't want that saved in the assets folder though. I wonder why it's saying that. Well, I'll see where it actually saves it. Did it say, yeah, it saved it in the asset scene. Well, let's go ahead and make some folders then, if it'll let me here. Because I want, so I'm going to go to assets, create folder. All right, here we go, and I'll name this one scenes. Because if I was going to end up with multiple scenes, I would want it to be in there where I could find them. And the reason why you want that is because when you click on that and you have multiple scenes, a quick way to load the next scene is to actually click on it right there in the window. You don't have to be like, well, how do I know which scene? You just go there, click it, and it opens that current scene. And we only have one, but it's good to know for when you have more than one. And some other folders I'm going to want to add here. The first time I clicked on assets up here at the top and did create, you can also right-click on assets down here as well to do create and say a new folder. And we're going to end up wanting a scripts folder, because we're going to end up writing at least one C# script that's going to want to go in there, and you're going to want to know where all your scripts are all together. And Unity actually can kind of identify some of these folders by their names. One of the examples would be if you have a folder and you name it prefabs. Now, a prefab is something that only, as far as I'm aware, exists in Unity as a Unity object. It's a thing that Unity created. And what it is it's not just an object like a character or an image. It's everything all put together. So if I were to have a character and I put a script that runs that character, and that character potentially has a sound that only happens around it, or has something else that goes on, all of those get combined into what's called a prefab. And those are really the power behind Unity. It uses those prefabs, creates them, maybe multiples of them if you tell the script to do that, or maybe just one if that's just the only character of that type. But prefabs do allow you to have multiple of the same thing replicated very easily. So I like to have that folder right away because we are going to be making some prefabs today. Let's say scene prefab scripts. I think that's all we really need right now. Now, some of the things you'll see right here is this is your scene window that has kind of a grid-like shape there, and it's got a couple objects that I can see here. And if I click on the little hand in the upper left, I can drag the screen. If I'm on the second icon, then that's better for like scrolling in and out or moving the camera itself if I want to just, well, I can't right click right now apparently, but it does slightly different behaviors, so I'm using the hand to get that centered so we can see. And what these are is the same thing you see right here under the hierarchy. So this hierarchy is going to tell you all the things that exist in your current scene. So if you have another scene, you're not going to see the things that you've created for that other scene under your hierarchy unless you load that scene. So we've got a directional light. It's a good basic light to start with. There are other lights in Unity, and I actually don't use most of them. It's actually a pretty all-around good lighting source. And then of course you're going to have a camera, and you're always going to want to have a main camera, or you don't have anything visual that you can see. You can have multiple cameras. For this, we're only going to have one camera though. And if you look, when I clicked on the camera, I got a camera preview. And it shows an image. It looks like I have sky already in the game, even though when you're looking up here, you don't see, oh, I guess you do see the sky. Well, you didn't before with older versions of Unity, but you can see it there. But if we click from scene over to game, you'll notice that grid goes away. This is what the game would look like when we're playing it. And of course, you also see that scene if you do hit play, then you see the game actually playing. Now, one of the things you don't want to do is edit your game and do a lot of changes if your game is running. If you have hit that play button right there in the middle, you're going to want to click that back off again. Because if you make changes, for example, to your character, you make your character bigger while it's playing, as soon as you stop playing, those changes are gone. They forever leave. So script changes should actually stay there, but if you save them while it's running, the game just potentially crashes because it's like, wait, you've changed what I'm trying to do and I don't know how to handle that. All right. So this game's going to be a little more 2D than it is 3D, and this was one of the questions I got earlier, is you could actually select when you made a new game whether you wanted it to be 2D or 3D. It actually doesn't matter what you start with. You can click it on or off at any time by going again up here to the upper left and clicking that little 2D. Now everything, it kind of zoomed. What happened is our view that we were looking at went behind the camera. So now we're looking from behind the camera at the world, and we're locked into that view. We're not looking at it from the side anymore. And we can leave that on or leave it off. And sometimes, even if you're making a 2D game, you might want to switch back and forth to make sure that everything is lining up. Because, as I was explaining earlier, Unity was very much made to be a 3D engine. The 2D really got added later, and it really is, technically it's always 3D, even if it's rendering in that 2D kind of a mode, making it look like a 2D game. So sometimes it's useful to kind of go to the side and look and see, where's that image at? Oh, I see, they're at the same position, they're overlapping each other and I can't see one. And it can help you to find that kind of problem later on. Now, what this game in particular, it kind of gets right into writing a script right away. And with Unity, if you come up here, well, let me show you just a little bit more. There is some other things under game object as to what you could create. You can create, if you're creating something empty, you might think, why would I create an empty? What is an empty? An empty is just a place. Maybe you want to attach your sound to that place. Then you could create an empty and attach a sound to it, and that would be the place that sound would be. And if you're in a 3D world moving around, the sound could get louder as you get closer or softer as you get farther away. And then there's also 3D objects. This is really great for when you're doing a prototype and you want to get something done really quick. You can create a 3D cube or a 3D square, or if you made one of these I was showing people, is a 3D capsule. And if I say create that, it appears down here in my hierarchy. I can barely see it on the screen there. So what I can do is I can double click it, and that zooms me right into it. I don't have to try to mess around and figure out how to drag to it. Now, one of the problems I had with this capsule, however, is I made, with a team at my school, we made an entire brick breaking game, but we wanted to be creative and fancy and make it pretty with these flowers. And instead of using rectangles, we decided our bricks are gonna be capsules. That's awesome, right? It'll be great. Until you get a couple hundred of those on the screen, and they were rotating and moving around and then trying to collide with a sphere. And the problem is these are made up of essentially two spheres, and like having a rectangle in the middle or something stretched in the middle. When it comes to collision, it's very, very expensive to figure out whether or not a sphere has hit this, because it has to know, all right, you're closer to this end, what's the radius, did you clip the end? And all the time we would end up going through the ends of them especially, and it just wouldn't have any effect at all. So you got to be a little careful even when you're doing something like that these tools are good for, like I say, they're good for prototyping, but if you want to use them in an actual game, you want to make sure you know what the costs of that are, so you don't spend, in our case, an entire semester making this really awesome game and then we couldn't release it because it couldn't run on a phone. Ran on a computer just fine. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So I can just click on it right there, right click, delete, and now it's gone. So that's pretty easy to do. And I'm still in 2D mode, so that's why I'm kind of just looking in and out. But let's go ahead and what's something that we could actually use if we're going to do a scripture memory game? Well, Unity has some cool things in here. When you come down to 2D objects, there's sprites. Well, I don't have any art or any sprites made right now. Sprites are just a nice flat image. You can animate it. You can do lots of things with sprites, but we don't really need that right now. We don't need a light or audio, but down here we have UI. And the cool thing about UI, which is the same as most other game engines that I'm aware of, is that this is a 2D object that essentially sticks to your camera. It's like it's stuck to that front of that camera. So no matter what else you put in the world, it's going to be visible. It's going to be right in front of that camera. So even if I zoom over and I'm looking at a tree, there's still that UI right in front of it. And that's what you would want. You wouldn't want your UI constantly disappearing and reappearing as other objects came in and out of your view. So what we're going to start with here was actually, I believe it was new with Unity 5. It may have been Unity 4 now that it's been a while. But we're going to start with this UI canvas. And now this canvas, I might have to actually, there we go. So when I clicked on that, I got this rectangular line. Or box. So this rectangular box is kind of showing me this is my space where I'm going to put stuff. And if I wanted to see, well, do I really like how that is, I could hit play. I actually can't see it in play, so that doesn't work. Hold on. Okay. I guess I have to put something in it first. If I put something there to cover that space, which we might want to do, you want to make sure that that's the right size. You don't want it going off the ends of the screen, because then it's going to push it together and make it fit on that screen. And let's see if I actually have, I don't think I have it right now. No. Normally when I'm at work, it must be an add-on, we actually have different sizes set for how big this screen will be. Like we can set it to the size of an iPhone 4. And even though no one really builds for an iPhone 4 anymore, it's a nice short kind of screen, so we're not counting on anything being on the edges. Whereas like a Note 5, if I built it for that, then on an iPhone, some of the things would get cut off potentially. iPhone 6 would be fine, but an iPhone 5 would not. So that's good to keep in mind if you're planning to build for a mobile device, which is generally what I've done in my experience. All right.
Scale to the other ones, it'll just cut off?
It'll squish it, or it'll cut it off depending on the settings you have. The default settings would be to squish it. And that can make it look quite odd.
Will it expand if it's a larger screen?
It should, yeah. No, it'll expand to either these edges, the left and right touch, or until the top or bottom touch. So whatever one hits first is where it should scale to. Now, I mean, you can't always count on that because especially with Android, we'll get funny settings. Some of the various versions it won't play the same on. So you really have to, when you're really getting out there to publish, you got to test it on everything and really see. And it's good just to assume that that stuff on the side is extra space that can be cut off and go with that. It just seems to work well for us anyway. Let me see here. We want to, I was also going to show. So when I clicked on that little drop down arrow right there, you'll see that it says Skybox, fog, flares. Those are all checked. Now this game's not going to have any of those things. So one of the things I can do is actually just check those off. And so when I check off the skybox, that sky in the background disappears. Because we actually don't need that. We're just dealing with a 2D game for right now. Alright, so we have a canvas here. And when we added the canvas, it also added an event system, which is good to have for later because that could very much, well, it's going to help with your buttons and other things. So I believe how I did this last time was I came over here to the canvas, and I can right click and go to 2D or UI objects and add a button. Now when I added that button, it made that button a child of the canvas. So the canvas is the parent, and if I move that canvas somewhere, all the buttons that are children of it should move with it, which is going to be important if I need for some reason to move it or to scale it. I want everything to scale together. And when I added it, it also added some stuff over here. We got a default script. And this script is the button action. It's the actually knowing what happens when I click on it. A lot of that is actually getting made by Unity. Unity knows, hey, you're going to want this to respond to these click events and things that I can then very quickly code myself as to what I want them to do. And when I open that, there was an arrow pointing at button. And when I click on that, I see that button also has a child. Button has text. So if I click here and zoom in, it actually says its own name. Well, I can change that right in the editor if I want to by coming over here again to this inspector window is what it's called, and I see that text box. I can change that, and instead I can say option 1, and it changes whatever it says. Now one of the things that's important to note though is anything I do in script to change that is going to get overwritten anyway for what I have here in the editor. So I'm actually not going to set anything specific here because it's going to be different for every verse, what we're going to want them to say. And these are going to be our options. So if we have, now I can't think of a verse, for God so loved, and there was a blank, you'd want it to be me. Or, could say you, and someone might pick that, but that's not the verse, it's just a potential option. So we'll go ahead and, the way I kind of designed this, actually a couple months ago, was to have 4 different options. I figured that's a good thing for a puzzle game. So I can keep clicking the canvas here, and keep going to UI and adding button, until I have 4 of them. Alright, so now we have 4. Now I don't really like those names, button, button 1, button 2, button 3. I'd rather give them an actual name. And that can be important later because Unity actually allows me to refer to them by their name. So while I'm writing the script, if that name is something I can remember what it is, then I can actually call it by that and change it based on its name. So I'm going to put, we'll just say word 1, which is probably not super creative, but word 2. The difference being is I'm getting rid of those brackets. I don't want those brackets there, or I can't call it with those parentheses. And it just looks like it might be a mistake. Like if I added an extra button by mistake, it might end up like that, and it would help me to recognize that it was a mistake. And I might even change, you could change the canvas name to like area, but that word is used a lot, so I'll just leave it as canvas. Alright, so we've got 4 words. But when I look at the scene, I don't see 4 buttons. Well, that's one of those times where I was like, if I was really confused, I could look around, or I could just look up here, and there's always a position, X, Y, and Z, that shows where this button actually is, and that is in relationship to its parent. So if we scroll back, yes, that is in fact in the center of the parent, and all of them are. They're all at 0, 0. So we're going to have to change that, and we're going to have to figure out where we want them to be. I could click on one. Nope, undo that. That was changing the wrong thing. So let me actually click that. So I clicked the little arrows up in the top left instead, and I got these you see a yellow and a red one here. If I switch to 3D mode for a second, you'll see this is where the blue is. So Z is that blue axis. For Unity, Y is up, X is going to be your side to side, and Z is always going to be how deep into the scene it actually is for a 3D game. Other engines actually have that reversed. Sometimes they'll have Z as the up axis. So you want to make sure you know that for your engine before you get into that and end up having your objects sideways. We had that problem quite a bit with an airplane flying game. We'd make these little airplanes and they kept flying sideways instead of flying forward. Alright, so I'll click back to that, and now I can just change by clicking each one and dragging them to where I think looks good. And it can be anywhere. You can pick wherever you want if you have your own copy of Unity. Now I probably don't want it in the upper half. I kind of want the verse to be up there. So maybe I can move it down a little bit like this. Now the thing about dragging like this is I'm not going to get it very exact. I'm not going to get to where they're all the same and all lined up. They're going to look a little off when we zoom in, and it doesn't look quite right. But what it does allow me to do is it gives me an idea as to where I want them, and then I can come back to the inspector and actually change the position by changing the numbers. So I don't want -44, I'll just do negative, how about negative, oh okay, so -50, when I made the number smaller it moved up, -50 should be down a little bit from that. The other button, that doesn't look far enough down, I'll do -60, there we go. And then, how about we do -100. Alright, so this one, -100, now they're lined up. Now I can't make this one -60, that would make it overlapping. So maybe -90. It's a little close together. I'll go ahead and go all the way to 100. And then I can copy that. I made that one -60, so now those two are side by side. Those ones are already on the same level. But you notice these two buttons are way farther over. So let's see what the opposite, -100, the opposite would be 100. So I'll go ahead and type in 100. Now sometimes when you're working with Unity, these numbers will end up looking like really, really long numbers. Like if I was trying to make it a perfect 1, sometimes you'll end up with .9999999. And it really doesn't matter significantly, but I personally still like to change them and try to keep them right there. Now you can also set them in code so that way you don't ever have to worry about how those actually are and if they're going to get bumped or moved a little bit. But we've got 4 buttons here. And currently these buttons don't do anything. So if I hit play and I click on this, it actually didn't even keep my Skybox off. But if you look, they kind of change color a little bit when I click them. And that's getting that from this button script that it automatically added. It's getting that response. And it's trying to call, but it doesn't know what it's supposed to do when I click it. Alright, so I'm going to add one more thing here. I want a space for the verse to be. Now I don't want that to be a button. I don't want people clicking on the verse, because I don't know what that would do unless somebody has an idea of what it would do if you clicked the verse. I guess it could give you a hint, but that wouldn't be very obvious, I don't think. So I can come over here to UI and see what my options are. Text is actually the option I will probably pick. You can do image, raw image. You can have sliders and scroll bars, things like that. But I think we'll go ahead and just go with plain old text. Oh, and I clicked the wrong one, so let's delete that. UI text. So again, I got it's a little bit fainter than the canvas was. But if I click on it, you can see a little rectangle with some words on it. Now one of the things I already see by looking at that is I don't want my words on the far left-hand side. So I can come in here and I'll just say, I was writing, I can do all things through Christ, who strengthens, if I can spell strengthens right, me. I think it's Philippians 4. I'm not exactly sure. I'll just leave that for now. That's the new King James Version. And I'm actually going to put a question mark there because I don't want to put in the wrong passage. But this gives me an idea of how well the things actually fit here. And I can already see that's nowhere near big enough. We need this whole space to be bigger. So I can make the text, I can adjust its width and height also up here in the inspector. So instead of 160, how about we try like 400? And maybe instead of a 30 height, we can go maybe a 150. And when I look at that, it might be kind of hard to see from back there, but I noticed that made the text overlap the buttons. So that's actually not what I want. But one of the ways I can fix that would be to drag it up. And I think I'd want that a little bit longer. So let's actually go 450 and maybe 125 instead. A little more rectangular shaped. I kind of like that. Now, there's other things you can change right here in the text. You can actually change the font, and you can center it. Just like you would in a Word doc, you just click on the center, and now those words are centered. And they're really small. Font size 14 is not what I'd want even on a mobile device, well, especially on a mobile device. Let's go, let's just go big for now. Well, okay, that's too big. Font size 26. There we go. Now I might find out later that that's too big of a font size. But I can also change the color of the words, which will probably be a lot easier on your eyes. Instead of them being black, maybe for now, since I haven't made any design decisions about that, I'll just go with white. And you can change that by changing the hex color down here if you have ever done websites and you know what the hex colors are for black and white. I know what that is. It's FF, FF, FF for white. And the word changed right there on the screen while I was doing it, which is one of the cool things about Unity. And of course, you can also just change the RGB or drag it around and pick whatever color you think you like the best here. Oops. So I'll close that. And I'm also going to click this other center to make it kind of in the middle of this rectangle. And I like that so far. So I'm going to come over here, and one of the things I do very often that I always encourage people to do is to go to Save Scene. And the other thing you're going to want to do is also save the project. Saving a scene and saving a project are not actually the same things. Saving the project is saving the overall thing. And you might want to do that if you did something that wasn't related to the scene specifically. And then of course scripts themselves have their own save as well. But just save often and you'll be much happier if you keep some copies. Or if you're going to do a major change you're not sure about, maybe have 2 copies of it until you're sure. But alright, so we've got that there. And when I click play, well, I can kind of see it. I still have that skybox. I need to actually figure out how to turn that skybox off permanently. I want it removed. I might have to come back to that though, because they completely changed where it's even at. They do that sometimes with new versions of an engine. And that's one of the reasons why some people like actually making their own. You don't have that kind of change happen on you unless you made the change. All right, but we've got 1 verse, and that's not a very exciting game. We're going to want more verses than that. So now it's time to come over to our scripts folder that we made earlier. And I just click right on it in the Create Projects folder there. And I can right-click on Scripts. I got a Create here. And now this Create looks a lot different than when I was over here and I'm clicking on this canvas and going, oh, I've got these 2D objects, 3D objects. When I'm over here on the script and I go to Create, instead I get scripts right there at the top, as well as other materials and other things I might want to create in that project window. Now for this, for Unity, you can do a C# script, you can do a JavaScript.
When you're doing a C# script, those are things, handle things like the garbage collector and so forth. You actually connect
It has its own version of .NET built in.
Okay.
So it actually can't do some of the things that .NET does.
Okay.
Garbage collection is one of the things that it does handle automatically,
Okay.
similar to how .NET would handle it, from what I understand. Now you can override it, and actually one of the things we did in a game was to actually override that and make it clear its garbage every second, because we had a problem of it clearing the garbage like right before an important event was about to happen.
Right.
And with phones, that can be a real issue, because now your phone is lagging and the boss is loading and now you're dead. Well, what happened? And people don't realize if they aren't controlling that, and it's easy to forget because with C# and .NET, you're not managing that in the same way you are with C++. So let's go ahead and make a C# script. And as soon as I hit create, I've got a new script here, and it has a name that is highlighted. I don't want it to be called new behavior script. I want it to be called something awesome like verse selection script or something, maybe just verse script, because I'm not going to make a whole bunch of scripts in this case. Now, if you were making a larger game, you'd probably want different scripts to handle different things. Like maybe picking the next verse might be one script, and determining whether or not you got the right answer could be done in a completely different script. In this case, we're going to stick it all in one script, which is kind of a bad coding standard, but for learning how to do this the first time, it works. So now I have something called the verse script, and because I named it that without clicking off or clicking anywhere else, it also named it that inside the script. So this gives me kind of it's giving me a summary view now of what my script looks like. Now I can't change a script in that little tiny window, so I can come here and I can double click on this. I'm actually not sure what it'll open in. Alright, for me it opens in Xamarin because I have that downloaded. It can also open in all kinds of, this is a free version of Xamarin. You can get Sublime.
Go to the Visual Studio?
Visual Studio would come with it. So if I hadn't changed it, that's what it would open in. So if you guys have just downloaded it, when you double click on that, Visual Studio is what you'll get. Or no, sorry, not Visual Studio. Visual Studio is not the one it comes with. That was the one I switched to first. What comes with it is MonoDevelop. And not a lot of people like MonoDevelop. So that's why they'll switch to downloading, maybe a free version of Visual Studio can handle it. Xamarin actually had a little bit more features.
What's the most recent version that comes with Mono? At least
Did it change? Did it come with Visual Studio?
Yeah, it made me install
Okay.
Visual Community.
So that must be new for Unity 5. Okay. Even better, because Visual Studio is way better than MonoDevelop, even though there was some issues I was having with it at first. And most likely not so much that Visual Studio was having problems, but that its connection with Unity when I first did it was pretty new, and it was a little buggy. But you can also change it if you come up here and you go to Unity. You've got some preferences here. You can change some fun things in here, and one of those would be your external tools. So this is where I've changed mine to say Xamarin Studio. And see, mine still says MonoDevelop is the built-in one. So I don't know, because of whatever version I'm on, it's kind of an off version. So, but yeah, I can change it right there. So that way every time I click it, it's going to default to Xamarin. Now there's some things I wouldn't want to open in that. So that's just something you kind of learn as you go. Like I say, Sublime is actually Sublime Text. This one down here is a free one that's also kind of nice and looks nice, and it doesn't have as many features, but it doesn't have as many bugs either. Alright, let me see if I can actually turn off. If it's not in here, alright, so Skybox is not in here. It's probably in, it shouldn't be in my build settings either. But if you go to File right here next to Unity, oh, and this will look a little bit different on a PC as opposed to a Mac. It just puts the menu in a different place. But you can see right here what Unity can build to. By default, it's going to be on the PC, Mac, and Linux standalone. It's going to be defaulting to building for your computer. Now, if you want to make it build to a web player, you can select that. It's not the best way to build to the web, I don't think, because at least it always used to need, for you to actually play it, you would have to have installed, so all your players would have to install an app.
They're also saying it's deprecated and that they're not supporting that.
Ah, yes, that would be the case, yeah, because the problem is you could put it on your web page, but then everyone would see, hey, if you want to play this, you got to click yes and install this Unity support, and a lot of people just didn't want to do that. They didn't know what it was. You know, it wasn't building to HTML5 or anything like that.
So is there any browser support in the newer versions?
I believe you can, oh, yep.
WebGL.
I do not have the module loaded, it says, but yeah, they added the WebGL down there. And I actually haven't gotten into it yet. It's because it's new with Unity 5. I am interested in seeing how well it works, to see how much it improved, because it was pretty frustrating before that people would go, you know, to your website or to your portfolio, and that doesn't make a good portfolio to show a potential employer when they have to install a plugin. They're just immediately going to be like, why do I have to do this? You didn't actually build it to anything, is kind of the impression they get. And in theory, it also builds to Samsung TV, and I do know someone who made a game for the PS Vita using Unity, and there was some frustrations there, but it's possible. You have to, you know, get Sony, a Sony build kit as well, but this is also where you would pick if I want to build for iOS, and this could be the same game. So the game we make, I would click iOS and I would build it from here. I could come down and do build and run, or just build, either of these. And then Android, I would build separately. So you have to build it a couple of times. Now, there's also no scenes in the build right now.
What's a Google Android project? So check that.
Oh, this one, you know, I've never actually used that. I don't know if that's if you have it plugged in, but I wouldn't think so. I've done development build before, so that way you can have you can plug in your device and get some log information and things like that from it. But right now we don't actually even have any scenes there. You do have to add open scenes, and so that was the scene I had open, and it added it up there. Now that's one of the things that's pretty cool, because if you end up with a game that has 10 levels, and you've got level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, it's going to remember all of them right here, and it will build them in the order that it shows here in the screen. It doesn't care what you've named them. It doesn't care if you said it's level 9 and 10. It's not going to know that. It's going to build them in the order shown here. But it's really easy to come in, and you can just click, drag, and drop when you have more than one scenes to change that order. And you can decide, hey, you know what, this level is harder than this level. I want it to be later in the game. So then you would move it there. And then you might also change the name just so that way people know what you've done. But that's how you would tell the game when it builds that this is the order I want these scenes to happen in. And that'll be important, like if you ever wanted to add like a loading screen later. Most people don't build that first, even though it's the first thing you see, like you know, with your logo or whatever. So you would add it in and drag it to the top. But we can go ahead and close that, and I actually didn't even have to click save. It should still have it there with that scene up there at the top, which is good. Otherwise I would build nothing, and you can actually it'll go through this little thing and build nothing. So you don't want to do that. All right. I was trying to see component. All right. That Skybox thing is just going to irritate me because I don't know where it's at now. I'll try to ignore it. Oh wait, I know where it is. If I go here to the camera. So we didn't click on the camera because we didn't talk about it. The camera has all kinds of fancy features. One of those features is that Skybox that is turning half of my screen blue, and I don't want that right now. So I can come over here, and where it says Skybox, I can just say a solid color, or, you know, and that would make it solid blue, which that's not really the color I'm going for, although it might be easy to see, so we might leave it that way for now. All right, we'll just go solid blue so you guys can actually see what it looks like. But you can change it to black and then have it be black all the time. You can also change other things here, like your field of view. If you zoom this in and out, I think we can do that while we're playing. So I can zoom this in and out. Oh, it's not going to make any difference because we have UI. And like I said, the UI is stuck to that camera. If we had a 3D object in the background and you change the perspective though, it'll make it wider, it'll make it narrower, and all of that based on where you put this. And then you can also, one of the things is the default for your camera is that far view, how far into the scene you can see, is 1,000. And that's actually a really big number that we don't need. So we can go ahead and move that down. And it shouldn't matter when it builds, but with older versions of Unity, it could actually have a big impact even on a 2D game. It will still matter though if you're making a 3D game and you don't want to see the mountains in the distance super clearly, then you might want to cut that back a little bit if your game is kind of choppy and not running well. Like I said though, you can't do things while it's playing, so I stopped playing or is the camera the exception? It might be. Nope, it's not the exception. It's set back to 1,000 because I did it while it was playing. So let me go ahead and change it here while it's not playing, just to move it down as kind of a matter of habit. I'm going to put the field of view back where it was. All right. So we have some of that stuff, and now we're actually ready to write our script. So like I was saying, you can come here, double click it, and open it up in whatever tool you have installed. And now default Unity scripts you make are going to actually inherit from mono behavior. So, and unless that's different with Visual Studio, I don't think so though. I think they still inherit from mono behavior by default. Now the first thing I do is I can't stand when my brackets are up there. I like opening brackets and closing brackets to be in the same line. That's just my preference for programming. But you'll see a couple things here that are Unity functions that you get just by default. And that would be your start function and your update function. And there's a couple important things you need to know about those. Your start function does happen when you start the game. So that's good to know. It's a good way to set some variables potentially. There are ways that you can do some things that happen before start, but we're not going to actually use any of those. So we're going to actually just use that start function. Now if you have multiple scripts that have multiple start functions, you can end up getting some strange behavior that you're not expecting because you're not telling Unity directly which one you actually want to happen first. So that can be one of the dangers of overusing that in multiple scripts. And then I'm just deleting these comments, but this one is also very important. That update is called once per frame. So anything you put in here, if I say I want to, I think print works, but what I'm used to doing to print would actually be to go debug.log, and then I can put two parentheses and inside the quotes I can say print this. And then for C# you want to end your line with a semicolon like that. Make that bigger. So when I come back to Unity, I need my debug window. Let's find it. I need actually the console window is what it's called. Well, let's see if it surfaces when I hit play or if it does not. All right, there we go. So I clicked down here on the bottom. Mine had this red message that you guys won't have because that's just something I get from another project. I'm using a cache server for another project, but we're not going to do that here. But when I clicked on it, it opened up my console window, and then I clicked at the top on this little tab here, and then I can drag this console window wherever I want it to be. I can put it over there. I can put it down here next to the hierarchy. But this is an important window because this is how you can use to print some logic, to print things to make sure things are actually happening the way you want them to, and also errors and things show up here as well. I'm going to hit clear because I don't want that old stuff. And then let's hit, oh, I didn't attach the script to anything. So that's one of the things you can see is, okay, so I told my script to do something, hit play, and the console window remained blank. It didn't print this. That's because I didn't attach it to anything. And in Unity, if you want a script to actually happen, to actually run, it has to be attached to something in the scene. You can attach it to the camera, you can attach it to the light, you can attach it to just about anything, but it does have to be attached to something or you're not actually calling that script. Unless there's There are exceptions, but we'll just go with that for the rule. Another script can potentially call it things like that, but for this, we're going to want to attach it. I'm going to go ahead and attach it to the canvas here. I don't want to attach it to the camera or the light in case I change those later, but I'm always going to have a canvas, and I don't want to attach it to each word because what if those words aren't always there? What if I select that button and it's the wrong answer, and so I hide it, or I disable it, or even destroy it? Then I would actually be destroying the script as well. So I would want to have it be on something that will always be there. So I'm just clicking on that script in the project window and dragging it onto Canvas until Canvas is highlighted and dropping it there. And then here in the inspector window, it's got a versus script attached to it now. Now if I didn't want that script to run, I could check and turn it off, but I want it turned on because I want it to actually do something. So I'm going to come back to my console window so that that's on the surface so I can see if it actually does what I told it to do, and hit play. And it still didn't do anything because maybe I didn't save. Let's see. I am actually going to have a power issue really soon, I've noticed, so I need to get my computer plugged in. How late does this one go? It's an hour and a half, so we've got a half hour left.
You have till 4 o'clock on the group photos.
Okay. We might have to go a little bit faster then so you can kind of see it in action, but let me see if I can at least get this plugged in somehow.
Power scripts to your right. It should be on the-
What's that?
should be a power script on the right.
Oh, there we go.
See it?
Awesome. Excellent. That resolves that issue. Now let's go ahead and come back here to this versus script, and not sure, oh, I know why. Because I said log, well no, I have it turned on. Logs would go to this first little tab here, warnings go here, and errors go there. So a lot of times when I'm building something, I only have the errors turned on. In a big project, I don't want to know the rest of it, I only want to know if there's an error. So I'm actually not sure why it didn't show what that does, because that should show you. Oh, there we go. That's what I was going to say. So that's the problem. Because I put it in the update script, it just spams print this every frame. That's not every second, that's every frame. So it's going to spam it a lot, really, really, really quickly.
What's the frame rate?
It can vary, which is one of the reasons why you also have to be careful. I believe it would default somewhere around, when I've run stuff, our games usually are around 60 frames. I don't know if that's actually a default though, or just because we set it that way. We probably did something to set it that way, because I think it would just go faster. And that's one of the things you'll notice is as you build more, your frame rate will drop even on the computer. So you can do a fixed update, which would do it at a fixed interval regardless of whether or not your game is lagging or running faster or things like that.
Based
So.
on the screen, but can you set the frame rate to 0? Just run it once? I'm actually thinking about using Unity for a text game. Just to use
Yeah.
the UI of your export.
Well, my recommendation in that case, you can definitely control your frame rate. I'm sure there are ways to do it. But what I would recommend is you either first are not putting it in the update function. You can put it in other functions.
Put it in the start, maybe.
Or it would just be, yeah, if it's in the start, or if it's just something that happens, like if you have some logic. So before, let's go ahead and we can kind of see that a little bit here, because actually a lot of ours will be built in the update function. It's not necessarily a bad place to start. It's just one of those things we have to kind of be aware of. And why some people will actually use, like at EA we use strange IOC and version of control, but it's definitely strange. I don't know that I would recommend it. All right, so what we need here is we need to identify some of these objects that we're trying to affect. So I can come up here before the start or any other functions, and I want to start writing what these variables are. So I'm going to say that these are public, at least for now, and I want a public text variable, not texture, just text, called text. I hate when it does that. called text. Actually, we'll call it verse. Okay. Now it's underlining it. So if I right click on that and go over here to fix, I get various ways to fix it. Now you're not going to see probably as many ways to fix it, but using Unity Engine UI should probably fix it. Yeah, there we go. So now it changed colors, and now it's the same colors as words like that, verse, script, and mono behavior. It means it's a keyword. It's actually, it knows what that is. And I can make another public one here. These are buttons, so I'm actually going to call them buttons. And it knows what a button is because I already added that using Unity Engine.UI. Now this one here is grayed out because I'm actually not using system.collections, but we probably will, or at least I use it quite often because it's how you would make arrays and lists, things like that. So I use them quite a bit. But for this button, I'll say word 1, and then I'm going to do a little bit of copy and paste magic because we want 4 of these. And underline them because they were all the same word, and you can't have the same variable name used twice or more than once in the same context. And this is public context. This is for the entire game. It should know what these are. All right. So I've got these. Now I saved that, or I just did Command S to save that, and I come back here. And now when I click on Canvas, some things have changed over here in your inspector window. It has none text, none button, because it doesn't know what those are just by the names that I gave them. It wouldn't know that. So what I can do in the hierarchy is I can click on this text, and I can drag it right over to the project well, hold on, it's changed what I was selecting, so I need to not change what I'm selecting, just drag. And I can drag it right here into the text and drop it. Now it's a little bit tricky because I have to make sure I'm selected on the canvas while I'm clicking the text and dragging it, so maybe I don't want to do that. What I can do instead is I can come over here and click this little circle with a dot in the middle. I can click that, and it pops up a screen here, and it tells me select a button because it knows that I want a button, and it knows what that means. So it's only going to tell me these are the buttons in this scene that I can select from. So I click them, and I can add them right there. So I've got that, and I'm getting to where I'm starting to come up with things that are all connected onto one object here, and I don't want to lose that. I want it to remember that as a prefab. So I'm going to go ahead while I'm thinking about it and click on Canvas and drag it to the prefabs folder right here and drop it into the prefabs folder. And then we'll see it did in fact do what I expected, which was it made this object here that looks like a cube. And you're like, why is it a cube? Well, that's the icon they use for prefabs. And so it sticks it right there. Just by dragging it into that folder, Unity knew what that folder, it knows what that word is. So I wouldn't want to drag scripts in there. It'd be like, you want me to make a prefab out of that? All right. But yeah, so it automatically converted it into a prefab. And I can also tell it worked because everything that's attached to that prefab got turned blue in my hierarchy window. And that means these are all part of the prefab. Now if I come over here to text and I'm like, I don't like that, I don't want that, I'm going to delete it. It says, are you sure? You're going to break the prefab instance. Do you really want to break your prefab? And I'm like, well, no, I don't want to do that, so cancel. Now I could, if I was like, oh, I'm not being careful, I just deleted that whole thing. So we did all that work for nothing, right? Well, or I could come back over here at the prefab, drag it back into my hierarchy. It's here again. I accidentally dropped it on top of the light, so I don't want that. Let me break that by dragging it up until I have a line. I can't have another thing selected. I have to have just a line and then release it. And now it's not part of that directional light anymore. I didn't want it to be a child of that. So now it's all back. And that's why prefabs are pretty cool in Unity. It saves a lot of that data there for you. I used to have a problem of occasionally dropping scripts, but I haven't noticed that happen in a long time. So I can check, and yes, indeed, the script is still there, and it still has things filled out. I think this is letting me, yeah, it's even letting me click on the little icon, and show me what's attached to that prefab, which is kind of a cool feature. But let's go back to actually making this script do something. And I actually have another version of the script that I might pull up here since we're a little short on time. Except I went and hid it, I think, so I might not be able to find it. It's good to have my notes referenced, though. No, I guess oh. Scripture. No result. Oh, because I spelled scripture wrong. There we go. Got this zip. Alright. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this up here. So one of the things I kind of added as today while I was trying to modify this and get more in there for you is I decided, you know, what if after we get the verse in, we want to add in some text to kind of maybe give the person some more information or, you know, have a comment in there. So I went ahead and added a text field, but you notice I put a to-do. I said, maybe we should add additional info, and the to-do goes in pink because that's a key. It's a word that it recognizes, and most of your, you know, if you open it in something that's not this, it might be a different color, but it usually recognizes that as this is something that's not finished yet, so it'll hold it there for me. All right, so that is the next step. So we added those buttons. But one of the things we didn't add was the text for the words for those buttons. So maybe I actually gave them kind of a bad name in this other one. I was getting ahead of myself. But that's one of the things you're going to want to do here, if you guys can see that. Let me make it a little bigger. I think it's at its max. Okay, it doesn't want to be bigger. All right, so what I'm doing here is, we've got the buttons themselves and then the text for the words. Where is the other copy? Did it close the one I was doing? I guess it did close the one I had open. That's odd. It won't. Oh, maybe because they have the same name? No, it shouldn't matter. They're in different places. Well, alright. Oops. Undo. Undo is an awesome thing. And these can actually, I don't think it even matters if they, no, I guess it does matter, they have the same variable name, at least in this case. So we have these texts, and we have, I'll say option 1. So then with that there, we can also come in and say, all right, Canvas, I need you to know what these are. So we're going to make these the text. Now, I opened up this text window using that little circle, and I can't tell which one is which. So I'm going to have to, because I didn't change the names of them here. So I'm actually going to do that drag and drop thing, because that's the only way that I actually know these apart right now. And you could, of course, change their names, so that way you don't ever get them mixed up. However, the order kind of doesn't matter, because it's just going to be the order that they show on the screen, and there are going to be 3 wrong answers anyway. Alright, so when I did that, because I did that after making it a prefab, it's kind of hard to tell, but these are kind of in a bold. The text is bigger than it is here, so I don't know if you can really tell that. But that's because I haven't actually made that part of my prefab. The prefab over there in the folder doesn't know about that text yet. So I need to come up here, and you'll see that there's this prefab line up towards the top. And I can go ahead and click apply. And then that made them no longer bold. And it is now part of the prefab and won't forget it. If I wanted to, before I did that, I could have clicked revert and it would have deleted it and just reset it. So it's good to know. You always want to make sure that you're applying things to a prefab if you're changing the prefab. And it's just going to keep on doing that. Not letting me open it. So let me open the folder that this is in. Come on. All right, now I have multiple copies. All right. So I want to have the other script here for referencing. And I might just go over and, now that we have those set up, now we're going to have some other variables, things that we're going to want to know about this game. Now you'll notice that these ones I actually made private. Now these are made public so that Unity can see them and so that Unity can attach them to that prefab. But these ones are private because nothing outside of this script actually needs to know about these variables. I'm not going to be attaching them to a prefab, so Unity doesn't need to know about them directly either or have access to changing them. What I'm going to want though is I have an int here, and this int is just how many verses are actually in this game. Because maybe I only want each verse to show one time, or maybe I want all the verses, maybe I want it to go through all the verses before it starts repeating them. In which case it needs to know how many there's going to be. And for now, I'm going to actually just set that to 2, but these are not being set to anything because they're just up here. They're just being named and given a property. So we're going to say what step are we currently on, because we're going to want multiple steps to each puzzle. And what current verse are we actually on? And then this isn't really, some people might cringe at the coding standard we're going to get to because it was just really fast, but I just had a bool, which is a true or false, to see do I want to load the next verse or do I want to load the next step? Which part am I actually on right now? And I could optimize that later. Maybe I don't need 2 bools for that, but for now it worked. And then I also want to know, I made a string here, a private string that has the correct answer in it. So what we're going to be doing is actually comparing the strings. It's going to say this is the string you selected and this is the string I'm actually looking for. Are these the same? And that's how it knows whether or not you actually got the correct answer. So this is the one it's comparing to, is your last selected answer is what I called it. And this is just how I'm generally used to writing variables, whether with the first one lowercase and then other words capital. There's other ways you can do it. Some people like to write their variables more like this. I only do that if it's like the name of a class or something though, or a major function like start. All right, so we have some variables. Now we can come down and in start, we'll actually set those up initially.
Sorry.
Is it going down? What's that?
Time-wise.
Yeah, well, we can talk about this a little bit and then I'll come back to make sure it doesn't really miss anything. But I went ahead and set 2 verses. Current step, I'm just saying let's always have the first step. We don't want to start on the second step of the same puzzle. So that I'm going ahead and setting that there. And I don't know why that's set to true, actually. I'm going to go ahead and change that. I'm going to set both of these defaults, loading the next verse and loading the next step. Oh, no, wait. I see why. Okay, we'll get to that. So I said loading next verse. It's actually going to be loading the first verse as well. So the variable name's a little confusing. And we're going to want to do that at the very start. And loading the next step, we don't want to do until they finish the first step. And correct answer, I didn't actually set it to anything because it's going to depend on which verse got picked. So in the start function, I'm not going to know that yet. I just put 2 quotes, and that's just an empty string. And then for my last selected answer, they haven't selected anything yet, so I put in the word none. And the reason I didn't just do 2 quotes like that is because then they would be the same, and it would think it was correct. They can't be the same unless they've actually got the correct answer. So this was just a quick way to, okay, now I've set up to start the game. Now I did do the rest of it under update here. And that, we might want the thing for, well, we can probably just put it online and people can fix it and modify it from there. But under update, I'm saying if load next verse, and you're thinking, maybe if you're not familiar with coding, what does that mean? Well, this is checking, it's actually checking the same thing as if I said equals true. Now, if I said is not equals true, then that would be saying the opposite. If that was false, then the rest of this would happen, the things in between the brackets. Or I could also do, if I wanted it to be checking if it was false, I could put an exclamation point in front of it. And that would be saying, if load next verse is false, then do this. But I want it to load only if it's true, and we did set it true right here, so at the very start it will be true. And that means that everything in these brackets here will happen. So that's where we gotta look is, so what are we doing here in this first step? Now this first line right here is we're actually gonna pick, so what's that first verse that we're loading? Which one are we actually loading? And I'm using here this random.range. These are capitalized for a reason, and if I actually come in here and delete this, I'll just copy it out. If I go random dot, oh, it's not helping me out. Usually it'll finish it for you and say range, and because it knows what those are. But it'll pick between this number and the total number of verses. Now you'll see 0. 0 means the first verse. And then we set it to 2, and then I'm actually putting in 2 verses. Well, this first one is inclusive, meaning it'll count 0, which is the first one, but it won't count this number, which is 2. So 0 and 1 are the only 2 verses it's going to be looking for. So the first 2 verses that I make is what it's going to be randomly picking between, because that's the range that I set. And so it'll pick that number. Current step is always going to start out as 1 though, because it's always going to be the first step. And now I'm going to move this down a little bit. This right here, this load verse with some parentheses and some things in between the parentheses. This is me calling a function. So how did I come up with that? What does that mean? Well, I have to actually write that function. So if we look for this and we go, where is load verse? I can search for that by doing, on mine it's Command F. It's also Control F on a PC. And I can look, where else is that verse? Okay, that's the same thing. It's calling this function. Let me make this screen a little smaller. It got too big. Aha! Now we come down here and we find the actual function that I'm referring to. I started out by using the word void, just like the start and updates both had that word in front. And that just means that it's not returning anything back to me. It's not giving me anything back. So it's a void function. But it is getting 2 things passed in. And right here, I can now see what those things are. It's going to be 2 ints. It's going to be the verse number. So which verse are we actually looking at? The first one or the second one? And what step are we on? The first step or the second step? And then if we look down here at what this is, and I'll upload this for you guys later so you can maybe have some questions about it. We can look a little bit at that. Oh, it didn't save my changes. That's frustrating. Oh, I know where it is. Scripture 2. Save. Alright, so I went ahead and wrote in down here, and we can maybe, I want to actually open this though so I can show you guys what it is. And I need the folder for that, and for some reason my search on this is not letting me find the folder. Should be able to right click and get folder that it's in. Hide stuff. I was hiding some stuff, maybe. Yeah, I don't know where it hit it. Well, so what I went ahead and did right here is in this function. So to make this function, again, I did the void, the name of the function, the things being passed in, and then it's going to have that open and close bracket down below, just like the start and update functions have. And it's going to have an if check to start right off. If the verse number is equal to 0, then I'm dealing with my first verse, and everything in here is going to be the first verse. And then is puzzle step equal to 1? If it is, then this is where we're at. We're at this spot right here. And so I went ahead and typed in, and we know that blank. Things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. Oh wait, it's supposed to be 2 blanks. Why is there not 2 blanks? Where's the next blank? To them that, oh, there we go. So that's a bug you don't want to fix. We need 2 blanks. There we go. You guys don't know that yet. I didn't tell you. So we've got that first blank there, and how do they pick what goes in? Well, we're going to have to set the text. So up here we called this text. In this copy, I called the text word 1, word 2. In the other one, I called it option 1 or 2. But you come back down here, and this is where that's where it's actually getting set. So I find that. Let's go down here. And I'm saying, oh, the first verse, maybe we'll go with most. We know that most things work together for good, right? Most things, or some things. And then you can put all things as the other answer. And then maybe no things is maybe the opposite, which is kind of the obvious wrong answer, but maybe some people want to, click just to see what happens. And then we also need to set that correct answer. So we're going to set it to all. And that's how it's going to see, hey, these two are the same. When I click this one, it's going to come out as true. So that's the first step for the first word. And now I rewrote this verse text, and I'm changing it again because I'm just doing a quick way of making that go from a blank line to having the word already there. You're not going to get to this step unless you get that first word. And so then we've got the second blank. For them, to good for them that blank God. So serve God, love God, adore, or obey. Well, it's not much of a puzzle for you guys because the correct answer is right there. And it'll compare those 2 strings and know that love is the correct answer. And then for the else, I'm not on the first step, I'm not on the second step, so I know I'm done. And it will actually just have the entire verse right there with no blanks in it. And this is why I came up with the idea of adding an info.text, maybe some additional info after you've solved the puzzle. And I kind of wrote some of this down. I can read what's actually here if I can make it. Well, it's not going to fit my screen, I don't think. So you see this in the gray, it means it's been commented out. And by doing a backslash and an asterisk, I'm saying I want this entire section to be commented out because it hasn't been implemented in the game yet. Oh, I know. I'll make it smaller so I can read it. Now what I found that was interesting about this verse was when I was looking it up, according to, you'll notice at the end, this is Romans 8:28, and it doesn't have anything written after it, so people know that that means King James Version. But I found it interesting when on Bible Gateway I looked it up, and it said another possible NIV translation, so not the one that's officially in the NIV, but another possible way of translating it would be, and we know that in all things God works together with those who love him to bring about what is good, with those who have been called according to his purpose. And that really struck me, that reordering of it, to really emphasize that this verse is about us working together with God and together with those who are called according to his purpose. Maybe you don't have, you don't feel like you have a purpose you've been called to. You're not a Sunday school teacher. You're not a missionary. You're not really sure what God wants you to do in life. And that doesn't mean that you're not still being asked here to work with other Christians, to work for and with God, along with those others who maybe they do have a clear purpose. Maybe they wrote this really awesome book that you really enjoy. But that's still someone that we're working with. And that's how God brings about good into our lives and into the lives of others, is through being able to use what we are willing to do for him. And I thought that was a really amazing kind of take on that. And that's where an app like this could really potentially touch some people. And my next example here is from the NIV. So of course I call out NIV. And one of the biggest challenges of an app like this is actually copyright issues, which is a very in some ways, frustrating thing to think, wait, the Bible's copywritten. King James Version can be used as much as you want. NIV has a specific rule. You can use it as much as you want so long as it is not 50% or more of the content you're using. So no more. Half of your verses, basically less than half of your verses could be in NIV. If all of them were in NIV, you would actually have to get their permission. You'd write them a letter, and most likely, if you had a good purpose, you could get that permission, but it would take time. So that's one thing you'd have to keep in mind. But as long as more than half of it is other versions of the Bible, you wouldn't have to worry about that. And some other versions are much, much more strict. And you'd have to look into their individual things before using that. And that's one of the things that might seem a little frustrating, but that you definitely don't want to get on the wrong side of, because you're trying to make something that's a good example, not trying to, offend other people or break their copyright laws. And so the other example I put is from the NIV, and it says, "What shall we say then? Shall we go on blank, so that grace may increase? By no means. We are those have." Oh, I think there's a typo there. Oh no, we are those have blank to sin. How can we live in it any longer? Yeah, there's some typos. You want to make sure you don't have typos in yours. But yeah, I found that really interesting too. And then there was an interesting question. A lot of people know the last verse in Romans 6, but they don't always know the first verse. So this was kind of a trick question to kind of get people, well, do you know what these other verses are too, and not just the last one in the chapter? Could you actually fill that out? And, it can make the game more challenging in that way. Now, one of the things I added that is something I'll just call out really quick with the 2 minutes we have left is up here, when we're loading that first verse, you'll see, so we called that function that we just talked about. And then there's this that says disabling a button if it's clicked, but it's incorrect. Enable buttons when a new step or new verse loads. So we just loaded a new verse, and we're saying that button 1, so this thing that we created up here at the top that is on our prefab, .gameObject. So that's a keyword when you're typing it, that it'll know what that means. And then .setActive and is true. And this is how, by setting this, that button is appearing in the game. It is true, it exists, it's enabled. Now if you click it, and we're adding some listeners here, and I'll upload this for you guys to see. It'll check the answer. All right, if you push button number 1, and that was the text on that one, so this was the text on button 1, that's now your last selected answer. So let's go down here a little bit farther and check. Is your last selected answer equal to the correct answer? If that is false, then down here you're going to be setting that game object that we set to true up above, you're going to be setting it to false. So that actually makes the button disappear, so you can't click it multiple times or get stuck or think it's not responding. And then when you load the next verse, they all get set back to true again. And that's kind of some of the power of Unity, is that it has the ability to use these predefined features and functions that things do, that if you had to write, this is what a game object is, this is what it means for it to be active, this is what it means for it to not be active, would actually be pretty difficult to do. But the game engine is there to help you out and help speed up that process and allow you to have a product that works very quickly. And if I could find the folder, I would show it to you guys, but unfortunately it has decided to disappear on my computer. So later this week, or later in the day or tomorrow, if you guys want to check it out, I'll show you that in action, how it's working. And I'll also make sure it gets uploaded so people can see, oh hey, this is what it looks like when I can see the whole thing and I'm not zoomed in on one portion. And then if you have questions about, wait, what is this line again, I can actually summarize and maybe have some written stuff to go with it, so that way people know.
Where would you upload the source code? You mentioned about uploading it later on?
Yeah, I'll give it to somebody from CGDC so that they can upload it and just throw it up there. Because I don't care if it's public, anyone can see it. It's just, a couple hours worth of work is all that went into writing something like that. But Yeah, and I might actually leave some of this blank too, so you guys can actually find it and play it a little bit, see what your skills are with remembering some of those. I tried to pick some of the more common memory verses, but we will see what people actually remember. It's surprisingly difficult when you're actually trying to do it on a device. And that's actually one of the problems I've had with some of the apps that are out there is even verses that I have memorized, I'm like, wait, these, it seems a little out of order, and it's King James, and now you're doing NIV, and I don't really know, because maybe I don't have it memorized in that version. So it's nice when you can actually still get the solution without knowing exactly how maybe it was in order, because maybe if you, like I grew up memorizing them in King James Version, not in NIV, so I wouldn't know, what the exact order of the words might be. All right, well, that's kind of a quick intro. Hopefully that helps you guys out a little bit with seeing how Unity works and what it can do.